Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. And I'm not often here in Cambridge on a Wednesday night, so I haven't had a chance to worship with you all before, and I'm really glad to be here tonight. And if I may, welcome to First Parish in Cambridge. It's so great to share this, our spiritual home together. Several years ago, I was walking my son home from elementary school in our neighborhood in Washington, D.C., when we came across some street art, some graffiti, spray painted on the side of an alley wall. Just one sentence of white text on a black background. And the text read, "It is in your self-interest to be very tender." It is in your self-interest to be very tender. And the sentence kind of stopped me in my tracks. I mean, let's face it, it's not often you see back alley graffiti promoting virtues like tenderness, right? Right? I found myself moved and intrigued that someone would speak up for tenderness on the tough streets of D.C., that someone would come to the defense of tenderness in the capital of a nation whose culture is so violently polarized. Now, my son, who was with me, was just learning to read at the time, so we stood there on the street and kind of worked through the sentence together, learning the words along the way, and he got to the end and he asked me, "Papa, what's tender?" And I said, "Well, honey, it's a little bit like being kind, or being gentle, or soft." "Soft," he said. 5's a literal age, so we just left it at kind and gentle. In the weeks and months that followed, this line of text stayed with me. What I couldn't seem to wrap my head around was its insistence that tenderness isn't simply a virtue, the right thing to do, but that it's somehow in our own self-interest, right? It is in your self-interest to be very tender. What do they mean by that? Did they mean it that it's in our self-interest to be tender to ourselves? That's certainly true. Did they mean it in some karmic sense, like you reap what you sow? If you're tender to the world will be tender back to you? The more I puzzled over it, the more that phrase felt like a kind of Buddhist koan, a riddle that the more you ponder it, it reveals more and more layers of meaning and insight, but never perhaps a definitive answer. I'd be curious how that sentence strikes you all. How is it in your self-interest to be very tender? So finally, I decided to Google it. I Googled, "It is in your self-interest to be very tender," and that's when I learned that the phrase actually comes from the conceptual artist Jenny Holzer. In her artwork, Holzer uses short, aphoristic, often witty sentences to kind of grab our attention, take us by surprise, make us think, not unlike a koan. And it turns out she first put the sentence about tenderness up on a theater marquee in the middle of Chicago, inviting the whole city to reflect on what it means to be tender. Even as I continued to puzzle over the phrase, I noticed that it had also struck a chord with my son, but in ways that perhaps I couldn't have anticipated. Basically, he took it upon himself to point out to me whenever I failed to live up to his tenderness standard. So, "Papa, why are you yelling to that driver in the car up in front of us? You know he can't hear you, right? Papa, why do you get so angry when you read your phone? Papa, don't be so impatient with me. Sometimes it's a struggle, tenderness. I'll tell you, over the last few months here in Cambridge, I found myself thinking a lot again about this tenderness quote. It feels to me like tenderness has been in short supply around here lately. In the wake of the war, the campus and city have been on edge. There's a palpable feeling of suspicion and mistrust. Folks have been assaulted by anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, by racism. Many of our leaders have been subject to personal attacks and death threats. As recently as a few weeks ago, I walked outside the church and there was the doxing trucks parked right in front of the church, accusing students and others in the community of being anti-Semites, posting people's photos and private contact information. So many people are hurting right now in our city, in our community, our campus, our world. Part of me just wants to take a page from Jenny Holzer and put a big banner out on the front of the church that says, Cambridge, it's in your self-interest to be very tender now. But I know I'm as guilty as anybody else. As our nation and our world grow increasingly bitter and polarized, I feel myself getting sucked into that vortex. I really struggle to remain soft and gentle and loving. How can we help one another remain tender-hearted? About a year after we spotted the graffiti, after we first spotted the graffiti, my son and I passed by that same alley again on our way back from school, and Nico said to me, Papa, the tender sign, it's gone. And sure enough, someone had painted it over it. So of course I thought to myself, well, who does that? Like who says to themselves, it's a good idea to paint over that nice quote about tenderness? I could hear my son saying to me, Papa, why are you yelling at the guy who painted over the sign about tenderness? I can't help myself. But though it's gone, it's not forgotten. This was many years ago, and my son is 12 now. And even to this day, when we pass by that alley, he likes to tell the story. Papa, do you remember that sign about tenderness? And I'm glad he remembers. And now that he's a tween, he's even more persistent at holding me accountable for the times that I fall short of his tenderness standards. And I guess I'm even grateful for that too. And maybe in the end, this is how we can help one another in our struggle to remain tender. Not by policing each other in some impossible tenderness standard, but by being gentle and good to each other, and by kindly reminding one another that it is in our self-interest to be very tender. May it be so, and amen. Friends, a while back, a good dear friend of mine wrote a poem called Gentle Now, Don't Add to Heartache. And as I move through the world these days and try to keep myself tender, try to add tenderness to the world, that's become a kind of mantra to me. Gentle now, Rob. Don't add to heartache. When I say it, I do like this. I put my hand over my heart. Gentle now. Don't add to heartache. And for our closing charge. I offer it even more as an invitation. I invite you to put your hand on your heart if you feel comfortable doing so. And may we say together now, gentle now, don't add to heartache. Amen.